Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, who is on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, good to have you here. Good morning.
Good morning.
You heard Secretary Pompeo and Senator Rubio say that if Qasem Soleimani had not been killed, there would have potentially been hundreds of Americans who would have been casualties. Do you believe that there was an imminent attack?
Well, first, it's incumbent upon the administration to present that evidence to Congress. But even if there was an imminent attack, and there are always threats being presented to U.S. forces in the region by Iran and Iranian proxies, the responsibility is on the administration to prove to us that by taking out the second most powerful political figure inside Iran, they are preventing more attacks rather than inspiring additional attacks. The reason that the Bush administration and the Obama administration did not greenlight the execution of Qasem Soleimani, despite the fact that he was carrying out attacks on U.S. forces, is because they believed ultimately that would get more Americans killed. And you can already see the consequences to U.S. security in the region with, as you have noted, the beginning of the process to expel American forces from Iraq.
We know that there was some notification given to Congress. You heard Senator Rubio say he knew what the threat was but couldn't share it. Who in Congress actually knows what happened?
So my understanding is that there was no consultation with Congress before this strike. That is in violation of the War Powers Act, and there has been very limited communication since then. I would hope that we will get a full briefing. But that briefing not only has to talk about the intel behind the attack, but why it was absolutely necessary to take this dramatic escalatory step. We do not generally execute high-level political figures of sovereign nations, in part because we know that that opens a Pandora's box that may expose American officials to assassination, but also because we know that ultimately that might get more Americans killed, as it likely will.
The administration had designated the part of the IRGC that Soleimani ran as a terror group, which is the sort of the cover that you heard Secretary Pompeo refer to in saying he was a terrorist as well. That argument doesn't hold up to you.
Well, he does not have authorization from Congress to go to war with Iran, and this potentially sets us on a course to do just that. Listen, this administration's Iran policy has been a disaster from the very beginning. Iran is more powerful today than at the beginning of the Trump administration. They've restarted the nuclear program. They have more influence in places like Yemen and in Syria, and now they are on the verge of launching potentially disastrous strikes against the United States. That is a disaster from the beginning to the end of this administration's policy towards Iran.
Just a few minutes ago, you said execute Qasem Soleimani. And on Twitter and on camera earlier this week, you used the word assassinate. Technically, that's prohibited under U.S. law. You chose that word for a reason. It's politically loaded. Why do you think that is needed here?
Well, I don't know any other way to describe it. This was the intentional execution of a high-level official in a sovereign nation. Qasem Soleimani is an evil man. He has absolutely ordered the murder of hundreds of Americans, but he is a high-level representative of a foreign government with a military that could strike at American civilians and American service people. The question is, why didn't the administration look at other means to try to stop this attack from happening? Reporting suggests that his own military leaders were shocked that the president chose an assassination versus more targeted strikes against other Iranian or Iranian proxy assets in the region.
Right, which is why I thought it was notable when the secretary said that all cabinet members had agreed and top national security advisors. I want to ask you, because you've been critical of whether this was legal for the president to do this, and specifically this authorization of military force debate. I spoke with the former Obama administration DHS Secretary, Jay Johnson. I'm sure you know him.
Yep.
He used to be general counsel at the Pentagon. And he said this: direct engagement of a senior military official of another nation is harder to justify under the AUMF, which is your argument. But having said that, under existing Office of Legal Counsel opinions, it's plain the president had constitutional authority to use lethal force against General Soleimani as vital national interests were implicated. Therefore, no congressional authorization was required. It's a former Pentagon lawyer, a Democrat. Why is he wrong?
So in this case, the president has the burden of explaining to the American public and to Congress why the strike against Qasem Soleimani was necessary to prevent future attacks against the United States. There is a general understanding that to prevent future attacks, imminent attacks, you can take action without Congress. The contention here is that by assassinating a high-level Iranian official, that you are actually going to inspire and create more attacks against the United States, not actually prevent those attacks. And so that's the burden of proof that he has.
By imminent, they meant ongoing. Qasem Soleimani was always targeting U.S. interests. Right? So it was always imminent.
So if that's the case, that isn't an imminent attack. If this is just the same set of threats that have existed to the United States personnel in the region for the last 7 years, then in that case, then the administration absolutely has the responsibility to come and get an authorization from Congress before taking action against a sovereign nation.
You know, there are a lot of people listening who will hear that and say, yes, particularly in the military, that'd be great if Congress did something about the AUMF. But look, they haven't. Because when they get their own party's leader in the Oval Office, no one wants to do something that's actually going to constrain the powers of the executive.
But listen, the president is bound by what Congress gives him the authority to do. The framers of the Constitution didn't give him the ability to start a war just because it was hard to get authorization from Congress. The framers wanted us to have the power because they were worried about exactly what's going on now. The president, by pulling out of the Iran deal, has set into
this is
motion.
an AUMF from 2002. There was the entire Obama administration. You're saying the reason nothing was updated to this point is what?
The risk is much greater today, right? When President Trump came into office, he set into motion a series of blind escalatory measures with Iran that now have us on the precipice of war. And if he is contemplating taking future military action against a broad set of threats to the American public, then he has the responsibility to come to Congress.
And he'll veto any authorization, if there was one, that's put in legislation and sent to his desk. You know that.
Well, again, he can't act without authorization from Congress unless he's responding to an imminent threat. And he has the responsibility now to prove to us that this was, in fact, an imminent threat. Again, the worry here is ultimately this is going to get more Americans killed. And the very fact that we are watching the Iraqis expel the United States from Iraq so that we can't carry out the fight against ISIS, right, which is in many ways a more grave threat to American interests in the region than Iran,
be a final decision.
Than Iran is. I think it is proof that this ultimately may accrue to the detriment of American national security interests.
Senator Murphy, thank you for coming in and talking to us today. We'll be right back with retired General David Petraeus. Joining us now is former Obama administration CIA Director, retired General David Petraeus. Good to have you here. Good morning.
Good to be with you, Margaret. Thank you.
Qasem Soleimani was your adversary when you were running
and a
CENTCOM.
very, very capable one.
What was your thought when you heard he'd been killed? The first thought?
Well, it was a surprise, to be candid. We'd never gone after him before, although I hasten to add that he never dared set foot inside Iraq, to my recollection, when I was commanding the surge, nor in the time that I was the commander of U.S. Central Command. He only really became visible in the way that he has in more recent years after the Arab Spring, supporting the murderous Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and then very actively supporting the Iranian-supported militia inside Iraq that were helping to contend with the Islamic State invasion of northern and western Iraq.
Now, he openly traveled.
He did. He did
selfies
on the front line. Yeah, he was on social media. But of course, that was a period when he was helping Iraq go after the same enemy that we eventually helped Iraq defeat. And make no mistake about it, those militia and the Iraqi security forces could not have defeated the Islamic State in Iraq without our enabling forces, our drones, our precision munitions, and our intelligence and advice.
There's been a lot of talk over the past few days that both the Obama and the Bush administrations had looked at targeting Qasem Soleimani and deemed it too risky. You just said that was not the case when you were in your position.
During the periods that I was in Iraq and in Central Command. I can't talk about what we might have discussed when I was the CIA director some years later, but certainly at those times, we just didn't have the opportunity. It never rose to any real consideration, even for me, much less taking it back to Washington, which we certainly would have done. Well, again, we had never had him on the X.
It wasn't the opportunity.
He was in Iraq. My understanding is prior to the surge, there was an episode where we detained some Iranian advisors and so forth, which we had to release, actually, under pressure from Iran through the president of Iraq. But that was just prior to the start of the surge.
You heard Secretary Pompeo on this program say that it is entirely consistent for the President of the United States to threaten to bomb Iran, 52 sites specifically, that it's consistent with trying to de-escalate. Is that credible?
Well, first of all, I think
certainly doesn't sound it.
What has happened here, I think, is frankly that we lost the element of deterrence, the component of deterrence that was seen as American will. Our drone, $130 million drone, was shot down, did nothing significant in response. 5% of the world's oil production taken out of operation. Numerous attacks on shipping, and then attacks on our forces, ultimately, of course, killing an American and wounding 4 of our soldiers. So ultimately, the president appears to have decided that it was necessary to take an action to shore up deterrence, to show that we were not going to accept this.
Does this do that?
And then,
does this deter?
Well, you will have to see. Again, the question is now, what will Iran do? Will they dare to respond directly with Iranian missiles against our forces, our embassies, our bases, our shipping, or what have you, or do they continue to operate through proxies, which I'm pretty confident they will do. And then again, what is the scope of that? And the bigger issue is one you actually got to this a bit with Secretary Pompeo. But I think the real question for the United States is, will there be a diplomatic initiative that says, okay, look, this is not headed in a good direction. We truly do want to de-escalate. Everyone is going to lose if this continues to ratchet upward. Can we now sit down and talk about getting back to the nuclear agreement with addressing the concerns that the administration has had?
You're saying there needs to be a strategy,
so forth.
A follow-up
well,
strategy.
And again, there does, and the question is that there? And I obviously
we didn't
don't
get an answer to
know.
that question.
Again, we'll have to see how that plays out in the days and weeks that lie ahead.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that the equivalent of the National Security Council in Iran is working very hard to do all the calculation and to determine what would the U.S. response be, having seen that the U.S. is willing to take a very significant action. I mean, it's impossible to overstate the significance of the attack that takes out Qasem Soleimani and the #2 militia leader in Iraq as well, who also never dared to set foot in Iraq during the surge after we missed him and he escaped. So this is bigger than bin Laden. It's bigger than Baghdadi. This is the equivalent in U.S. terms of the CIA director, CENTCOM commander, JSOC commander, and presidential envoy for the region for Iran, in the most powerful figure in Iran for the solidification of the Shia crescent, and also the operational commander of the actions that they were pursuing.
And if another country had taken out even one of the individuals you just listed there, how would the U.S. interpret that? An act of war?
Again, these are definitions. I mean, were we not at war already? I don't know. I'll leave that to the constitutional scholars and so forth. The same with whether the Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the authority to do what he did.
Iran's revolutionary regime, you heard Senator Murphy say, they're stronger now than they've been. Economically, they're really on the ropes.
I don't think that's entirely accurate. I mean, their economy is in dismal shape.
Right.
The people are demonstrating on the streets in unprecedented numbers since the revolution against the economic deprivation, the lack of employment opportunities, and the plummeting of their quality of life. So they're not, by the way, they're not that invested in the kinds of Iranian adventures that have been funded and carried out by the Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force under the leadership of Qasem Soleimani. They understandably they care about themselves and their families, and they're not that happy.
But what I've had other military officials say to me is that all may be true. This may be a blow to the regime. Financially, they are struggling, but that the United States may be underestimating the brutality the regime is willing to take to keep themselves in power. That this is not a tip towards regime
Oh, I
change.
don't underestimate that at all. There are 2 million besieged militia, they're called. These are thugs with pipes on the streets that will clear the streets to the extent that they can. That's in addition to the Revolutionary Guards Corps and the Armed Forces and Ministry of Interior Forces. So again, this regime is not going to go quietly into the night. And I don't think this leads to regime replacement or some kind of failure of the regime. That's not to be expected. The question is, what does the regime do in response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani?
Last question. It's a quick one. It's your question. How does it end?
Well, this is the reason I was asking about what is our strategy from here. Do we have a diplomatic initiative to reach out? It's not quite enough, I don't think, to say, well, they know how to reach us. I think we should actually be trying to reach out through intermediaries first, of course, as we have in the past, and then trying to come to some kind of agreement about how to get back to the nuclear deal that had its strengths as well as some shortcomings, to be sure, and then address the other legitimate grievances and issues that we have about militia activity support and the missile program.
General Petraeus, good to have you here.
Thanks, Mark.
We'll be back in a moment with Democratic Party Chair Tom Perez, and we'll look at some brand new battleground tracker polls out this morning. We turn now to Campaign 2020. Our CBS News Battleground Tracker shows another shift at the top of the polls. We surveyed 2 early contests this week. In Iowa, Senator Bernie Sanders now shares the top spot with 23% support, along with former Vice President Biden and former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar follow with 16% and 7% respectively. The rest are 3% or below. In New Hampshire, Sanders is also on top. He comes in with 27% support compared to Biden at 25%, Warren at 18%, Buttigieg at 13%, and Klobuchar at 7%. There is more detail on the poll on our website at cbsnews.com. In the 3 months since he suffered a heart attack, Sanders has solidified his support. Our Anthony Salvanto tells us that Sanders' rise is due in part to some liberal supporters of Elizabeth Warren's moving his way. Also, his core of support is strong and steady, as opposed to others whose campaigns have seen more volatility. We want to note that Sanders also came in on top with fundraising among Democrats in the 4th quarter, raising almost $35 million, just under $10 million more than his closest competitor there on the fundraising front, Mayor Buttigieg. The Democratic field now stands at 14 candidates after former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro quit the race this past week. For a closer look, we turn to the chairman of the Democratic Party, Tom Perez. Good to have you here.
Always great to be with you.
But what do you make of these polls?
Well, we have a deep bench, and it's a fluid field. And this is not new for the run-up to New Hampshire and Iowa. We've seen it in 2007, in 2008 with then Senator Obama and Senator Clinton. And what I see are the following. Fluid field because we have a deep bench. The enthusiasm is off the charts. 2008 was the high water mark for participation in Iowa. I'm confident we're going to surpass that because there is so much energy across everywhere. And I'm equally confident that at the end of the day, we're going to come together around a nominee. I don't know who that is. And I think the fact that we have such fluidity is a source of excitement. And that's why it's so important for us to understand the 4 early states constitute about 5% of the delegate count. They're important 5%, but only 5%. And so this is a marathon.
It's a jump ball at this point still.
I would agree.
So for this week, though, we saw Julian Castro drop out.
Yep.
We know with this next debate stage, Cory Booker, Deval Patrick, they're not going to be on it.
Sure.
Andrew Yang. They're all campaigning hard, though. Why do you think minority candidates haven't gotten more traction in the way that meets your standard to stand on that debate stage?
Well, I was very sad when Kamala Harris left the race. As you know, she qualified for the December debate stage, and I'm confident she would have qualified had she still been in the race for January.
Her issue is fundraising. I'm asking about the people who are
no, I understand. And, you know, I take a backseat to no one in our commitment to making sure our field is diverse, and we've had so many people and so many candidates of color who've been in the race throughout. And
but
whoever
this next
wins,
debate stage is all white.
Well, we don't know yet because we still have a number of days left, and so we'll see who makes the debate stage. But here's, for me, the most important thing is we've created thresholds now, and these aren't new thresholds. And you know, those who say that we've somehow done a disservice or have made it harder for candidates of color. I disagree with that. The candidates who make the debate stage are the candidates who do the best job of working across the ideological spectrum of the Democratic Party. Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton,
Right.
Barack Obama, all of them qualified and would qualify with these debate criteria.
You're saying you could see some new entrant to the perhaps January debate, but are you actually suggesting that you might revisit these standards for the future debates to allow for more diversity?
Well, again, if your question is should we lower, again, the debate threshold right now is quite low. It's quite fair. Nobody who has been at below 5% a month before the caucus or primary has ever won a caucus or primary. And so what we have done is to make sure we've set a fair bar. It's the most inclusive bar ever. And then you have to demonstrate progress. And the candidates who are at the top of the field right now are the candidates who've been able to amass support among the wide array of our diverse.
You're not changing.
Well, again, you have to demonstrate progress here. And again, the candidates who you saw there are the candidates who have been able to demonstrate that progress. And that means that they are showing support in communities of color. You can't win the Democratic primary if you don't have strong support in communities of color.
But you're not changing standards to make the debate stage for February, for March, for April.
Well, we don't know what the standards are for February, March, or April. But if you're asking me, should we lower the debate threshold?
I didn't say lower, I said change.
Well, as you move throughout the debate process, you always you have to raise the bar because we will see people who have voted as of February, and so we will assess then and then make those judgments.
So Bernie Sanders, we just showed the war chest that he has built. He's taking in a lot of small dollar donations. In the past, you've said you wanted to kind of incentivize grassroots money raising. So does that mean that the DNC would prefer that as the chief way for a candidate to fund a campaign, not by comparison what Mike Bloomberg is doing, which is self-finance?
Well, actually, if you look at all the candidates who are in that polling that we've just showed, what we're seeing is that there has been Democratic fundraising, Democratic candidates for president and the DNC have actually outraised Trump and the RNC in 2019.
So you're fine with self-financing when it comes to Mike Bloomberg's strategy?
Pardon me?
Mike Bloomberg, self-financing.
Well, that's up to Mayor Bloomberg. He has decided that, and the voters will figure out and will decide whether they believe Mike Bloomberg is the candidate. What I'm excited about is we have more, and it's not, I applaud Senator Sanders.
Yeah.
All the candidates have been making tremendous progress in grassroots fundraising. Okay. We had more new grassroots donors in 2019 than in 2017 and 2018 combined. That's good for the party.
We have to lead it there. We want to have you back again.
We'd love to.
A lot of news today. We're going to be right back. That's it for us. Next week, we'll be talking with Gary Cohn in his first Sunday show appearance since leaving the Trump administration. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.